Welcome to Make More Marbles. My name is Brad Hart, and we're here to interview the game changers, the future makers, the co-collaborators and creators who are here to collaborate with one another towards a better future for all of us. Enjoy the show. We've got a great guest coming up for you right now.
Good stuff, yeah.
Welcome to Make More Marbles. My name is Brad Hart. Today I am thrilled because I got a brother from another mother coming in from Hawaii.
What up, bro?
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
What's going on, homie?
Oh, Ryan, welcome to the show. Ryan Charaba is a 20-year veteran of submariner in the Navy, in our nation's Navy. Thank you for your service, Ryan. And he has a really interesting story around world travel, around leadership, around just understanding the very depth and core of what it is to be a man. So I'm really excited to get into it today with Ryan and share his story with the world, because I just saw him give one of his first live appearances ever here in Encinitas, California. He got on a plane last minute and came and jammed it up with us, and he brought down the house. So I'm super stoked to have you on the show, Ryan. Welcome.
Cool, man. I'm stoked to be here. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? I feel like my earphones feel weird. Everything good?
You are good
Okay,
to
cool.
go. Everything's great. Yeah, why don't we start off with the beginning, right? Let's get into it. People who may not know you, let's kind of get into that hero's journey and tell people what's up and where you come from and what you're all about.
Okay. All the way back, I was born in Eatonville, Washington. My parents were 18 years old, and immediately thereafter, my parents were really poor. They didn't have any money. We started to move wherever my father could find work. He'd get work here, get a contract. My dad did drywall and or tree planting, so he moved all over. We moved all over, and a contract would come up. There'd be no work. We'd have to move to another spot. So by the time I was 18 years old, I moved 36 times. And then I went to 13 different schools in the process of that. And it's somewhere in there, I got sick of moving, and I was like, I'm got to get out of here. I'm going to get out of the house as soon as I can. And so I joined the Navy, and so they could move me all over the world instead too. So
Nobody's going to tell me to go anywhere. So I'm going to join the Navy.
Yeah. And so I'd say this, I started to realize this pattern, exactly what you just said. Nobody's going to tell me to do anything. It's a joke I have with my wife. She'll be like, hey, can you go do this? I'm like, don't you tell me what to do. And so it's like this hilarious joke that we have. And I realized I was probably 30, probably started when I was 27, really started to set in when I was like 34, 35. It's like, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. Yet I keep signing up for this same thing that has people telling me what to do. So and then it like stumbled into this whole kind of, I don't know, second, third wave of awakening for me, which I consider the awakening portions of my life. And then finally, it was probably 17 years into my career, I had like, I guess, a mental breakdown is the word we call it, and slipped into like a really big depression, and almost end up getting removed from service because of, just being down and done, and scraped together the last remnants of something in the Navy. There's a department where they kind of send all the washouts, and they're generally younger sailors that wash out. And so then they slide me over there, and everybody's kind of like, what's this guy doing there? I was a chief in the Navy. I was an E7. I've been in the Navy for 17 years. It's very rare for that to happen. And so then you have this whole bucket full of sailors over there that are kind of like the outcasts, the rejects, the guys that have been in trouble. And so for the last 2.5, almost 3 years in the Navy, I kind of took these sailors and started asking questions like, why? How come? What happened to you? Like, what happened to you? How come you downfall? Because I kind of realized myself, like kind of an awakening moment when I Jerry Maguired at work. And so instead of just telling all these guys that they suck and you're useless and the Navy's just throwing you away, they don't have anything, get out of here, kind of like figuring out why they ended up with the problems that they had and why they ended up kind of at the crossroads they were at, and which way can we move so that your life is as successful as possible. And which was actually two parts. It was beneficial to the Navy because they want to process these guys smartly. And a lot of guys, if they're stuck in a fear scarcity mode and they're like, oh, I don't know, like this is my only paycheck, I'm getting kicked out. I'm getting kicked out of the thing that got me away from where I didn't want to be. Like, what am I going to do? And so kind of helping these guys find themselves and finding that they have a purpose and that they are talented and have skills. they were actually more motivated to go back. And sometimes they kind of found themselves more motivated to like, hey, I want to give this another try and actually stay in, which was good for the sailors and the Navy together. So that was kind of a really fortunate thing for me. And then I kind of put together my coaching business while doing that the last 2.5 years. I'd hired a coach myself. And then, it just all kind of worked out really providentially, and really, really grateful for that process, and really grateful for my depression and anxiety and all those things that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of let's start opening books and actually paying attention to what's going on and putting together the little details that kind of create the environments in which we find ourselves in.
And that's one of the reasons I love you, Ryan, is because you didn't just allow the story to end. I mean, you could have, I remember you told the story about wanting to jerk the wheel on the car. On the way to, because you just couldn't do another day.
Yeah.
And you knew, like, oh, I just jerk this wheel and I'll flip over the embankment. You had it all mapped out. Like, you were ready to check.
Mapped.
You stuck with it. And that ultimately changed the course of your life and everybody else's as well, right? When we tend to focus on ourselves and our own pain, we can make up hell, right? We can generate manifest hell. But when we search for meaning outside of ourselves and we look to be a service to others, all of a sudden you're this chief, right? You're this E7, been in for 17 years. A lot of these younger guys, they're ready to wash out. You were able to catch them. And one of the things I like to tell people is that Ryan's the why guy. We call him Ryan the why guy, right? Because he will get underneath and into whatever it is that's going on for you. And he's incredible at that. He's a little bit of a bull in a china shop sometimes, but he's really good at getting to where he is.
Heck yeah.
And you really can't get anything past him. So as the why guy now in this transition you're still making, right? It's not completely
Oh, for sure.
You just got out of the Navy back in July, I want to say.
July, 5 months and 3 days ago.
So what has that transition been like from being away from, that consistency and that rigor and that standard that you're upheld to now being kind of out on your own? You have a young family. What's that been like for you?
I'm super glad. I think this is a question that I wanted to talk about the most. And so you spend 20 years doing anything, your ego can get very big. And you have been, 10 years to become a master at something. So I spent 20 years inside the Navy. 20 years becoming a master of my craft, knowing exactly what I was talking about. Chief petty officers are very, very hell and high renowned to know the ins and outs of policy inside of the entire Navy for everything. They're the go-to for that information. And so I got out of the Navy and ready to dive into my own business thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to freaking crush this. It's going to roll right over. And I think one of the things that I'm even more so grateful with, and I'm glad is true, is with every stone that I unturn and every question that I ask and get an answer for, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more questions, new things. And so it's really exciting to find out that there's so much more for me to learn. And even though I've had some success and I have some clients and things are working and the bills are still getting paid, I believe that I haven't even scratched the surface as far as that transition goes. And I think just like you said, the transition is still in process. And I hope that that transition never, ever ends. Like, I hope it's a continual turning and evolving into something new. And I think it's just, I thought about this conversation today, since we talked last week about like, what is exactly what I do? Like, yes, I'm the why person or the why guy, which I actually really dig. So it's really hard to pin down exactly what it is because it's only been 5 months since I've left. And so I have a couple of projects that I'm working on, yet really the biggest focus in this transition, aside from building the business and figuring out exactly what I want to do, is, like you're saying, my daughter's 1.5 years old. My son moved in with us. It'll be 2 years, almost 2 years ago in March. And so just really growing that connection, that 20 years of being gone over half the time really disrupts on a constant basis. So I let my family disrupt my business regularly. So, which has been really, really amazing to have time with my wife, McCare, who's a business owner as well. And my son, who's going to be 17 in March, he's either doing college or the Navy. He hasn't decided yet. And that's part of our goals meeting this year, to make a decision for that. And Charlie, my daughter, she's 19 months and climbing rocks and doing crazy stuff and keeping me on my toes. So that's where we're at now. and we'll see where it takes us, you know, after this call, this afternoon, tomorrow, next year, etc.
And I just love that you're taking it one day at a time. I mean, here's what I know after being an entrepreneur for 20 years, right? Since I was 12, having a similar level of maybe, you know, figuring it out that you have in the Navy, you feel like you're starting to get good at stuff. And it's in mentoring that I realized that, wow, okay, I don't realize how much I actually know, right? I look back and I'm like, wow, there's like all these lessons that I had to go through, and having jobs and failing and going broke and getting into debt and figuring it out, and then making a bunch of money and still not being happy and coming back to that and trying it different ways and partnerships that didn't work out and just all this stuff that had I known in the beginning when I first went and knocked on the door saying to somebody like, hey, can I borrow your mower to go mow our lawn because ours is busted, and by the way, will give me $20 to mow your lawn? That was the beginning. Had I known then how hard it was going to be and that I was going to be a diehard entrepreneur, I might not have started. So the entire point is to take it one day at a time and to keep saying, oh, there's another thread to pull on. I always say something on these podcasts about how, you know, every single question, every single, you know, why is that? Every little, you know, just kind of needling thing that comes into your purview about, hey, why? You get to pull on this thread. And as you pull on more threads, you kind of unravel the sweater, right? To quote that Whizzer song. And when you unravel the sweater, the naked truth is all that's left. And that's really what all these interviews have been. And what I really love about where you're going is that you're so good at that. And you have such a natural curiosity about people and situations and why is it like this, that, you know, and having come from such a painful why standpoint, and I already know the answer, but I really want to tell this story because I think it's really awesome. Okay. It's about what happens in the Navy, Ryan, in your experience when you ask why.
Oh man.
And why is it so important?
The evolution, I want to start, we're going to talk about millennials and kind of go backwards, and your generation, and I'm right on the cusp, like right behind you. I think we're 5 or 6 years apart. We're with information is such a, it's really available. We carry massive amounts of information on our phones and our pockets. There's nothing that we aren't able to access in a moment's notice. Just this morning, I was Googling the elevational changes in Montana and how that affects fungi, because I was on a hike this last weekend with this guy who's a botanist, and he did his summer freaking dissertation study on this thing. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to check that out, because of course somebody does that research, and of course it's out there, right? That information exists. And so I found, and now back up 30 years, 40 years. So I was born in 1979 and I joined the Navy in 1997, which is like on the cusp end where most of the guys that were in charge at that time in the Navy were all Cold War, were born and raised in the, as far as the Navy goes, in the Cold War, where they had a very like, this is what we're doing. We're fighting Russia in Cuba. And like, there's no other questions. Like, we're doing this because Russia's going to, you know, Wolverines, like it's going to red dawn us or some crap like that, you know? And so I joined the Navy in 97 when it was like the Gulf War was over and like there's some stuff going on. And I didn't know anything about Russia or the Cold War. Like I'd seen some Tom Clancy movies, yet I was like, okay, I mean, I guess you're pretty hardcore about Russia. Like these guys were hardcore. Like I was a sonar tech on submarines. We were just out there looking for Russia when, I mean, we were off the coast of Florida looking for Russia. And I'm like, Florida's right there. Like, this is really weird. And so asking questions like why, like, hey, why are we doing this? You just shut your mouth and you just freaking do this. And so I know the story that Brad's talking about, and I'll retell it here really quickly because I think it's hilarious. On submarines, you're required to learn every part of the ship, regardless of what your job is. Because if you're back aft on the rowing machine next to the hydraulic plant, because that's where it is, in the refrigeration plant, if there's a hydraulic rupture, it's your job to run over there and close the valve to isolate it, just because you may be the guy that's closest to it. Or if a fire starts, there's a fire hose directly below you, below the rowing machine, and there's also flooding actuators to close all the hole openings in the aft portion of the ship there as well. It's just your job to know all these details and not to ask, to know why they're there at such an intricate detail that to ever ask the question why is ridiculous. Well, of course, why don't you know this? You know, and so I remember taking this qualification card back to the mechanics to get checkouts on those exact systems near that rowing machine. and in Maine Seawater Bay. And this is where they bring all the water into the ship from the ocean to cool the reactor plant. That's what it's for. Huge valves, and these huge pumps that are like probably the size of your bed. Like, I know your bed is behind you, like place a massive pump like the size of a queen size bed. It's sitting there, except make it the same exact height. It's like a cube size queen size bed. Yeah. Oh, that's different.
Next to the
That's right. You're in the different room. Yeah, that's cool. Anyways, so I'm back there, and I remember they're like, hey, you need to know this. It's super important. And I'm like, well, I don't understand. Like, why do I need to know this? And I'm like, what? And so all these big mechanics like jump me. They rough me up a little bit, and then they wrap me around this pump, and they tape me to it. And, and then they sent a ransom note up forward to the sonar techs. Remember, this is like 1997 or something, like maybe early 1998. So this is 20 years ago. And they sent this note upstairs, said, hey, if you want your nub back or your non-usable body, because I was new, I wasn't qualified at anything. I had very little use except to breathe the air and eat the food, and then poop in the tanks, right? Which is another joke we say. And then the ransom note said, hey, you can have your guy back if you bring us 3 Mountain Dews, a Twix, and 2 Snickers bars, right? And of course, I was like, oh, yeah, they're going to come save me, because sonar techs do not negotiate with terrorists. So so it's like probably 10, 15 minutes later, and then, these guys, these ridiculous freaking sonar guys, sailors are the most ridiculous people in the world. I love them to death. They're my life's blood, and I care about them so much. But there's just this ridiculous motley crew of freaking people, and they're coming back like, "Give us our guy back," And of course they're like, "Don't worry, we're gonna save you." And I'm like, "Yeah, but like then this pipe." And so then there's like this battle royale. It looks like something off of freaking WW.
So, let me just set the scene here. So you're tied to the pipe, taped to it with your mouth duct taped.
Yeah.
These guys bust in, trying to save you. And what happens?
And so it's like a cage match, or like the Royal Rumble from like back in the day with like Jake the Snake and Mr. Perfect and Hulk Hogan and Andre Giant. And like there's 15 guys crammed, except instead of this wide open ring, it's like this cramped, tight space where the passageways are like as wide as your desk, and people are climbing down from ladders and kicking guys, and freaking dudes are crawling out and like, smash a guy into a pipe and stuff. And like people, it was kind of intense.
Double Dragon.
Yeah, dude, it was like kind of intense how much we would actually beat each other up. Like, it's not like, like we'd really go for it. There were certain things you didn't hit each other in the face. And you generally would strike people wherever, if it made a mark, it would be covered up by your uniform, so you didn't get in trouble, even though the command at the time didn't really care. It wasn't until after Y2K and stuff when they started to like really, really hammer down. Like once YouTube started getting big and they started seeing guys like pinning people and doing the hazing, started getting on phones, like that's when everything started to get shut down. But up to that point, it was inside of a submarine and nobody ever knew about it. So asking why inside of the Navy often got you beat up. And they'd be like, well, you better look it up. Like, you better go find a book and look it up. And if you didn't, like, I remember having like a qual notebook that I would carry around with me all times, and like what we call an SSM, which is a submarine something manual, ship service manual, which would have, if it was about trim and drain, there's a specific manual for that. If it's about refrigeration, there's a specific manual for that, hydraulics, etc. And if you weren't carrying this book around all the time with your qual card on you, ready for anybody to look at it at a time, like that was, you were going to get it handed to you. And so over the span, I remember it took me a year to qualify. And then when you qualify, like the beatings stop, like they pull you over to the other team, it's like a frat, like your plebe summer at midshipman, or it's rush when you're, once you're over there, like you're in, and now the new guys, like, and it became kind of this weird dysfunctional rite of passage as men that we kind of adopted, because the rites of passage from old times, whether it was, walking on hot coals, or, eating the freaking heart of the first thing you killed, like in an Amazon tribe or something like that. Like these rites of passages, whether they were handled well or not, became this new thing in the Navy, and this whole thing, and it was all kind of under the guise of tradition, and tradition can get very modeled as the hundreds and hundreds of years can go by. And another thing about the Navy as well is that back in the 1700s in times of wooden ships, if a ship was short on sailors, they'd pull into port, they'd sweep through the bars at 2, 3 in the morning, grab the guys who were hemmed up and all drunk, throw them on the ship, get underway, and when they woke up, congratulations, you're in the Navy, And so, although that's not the same way we do it now, I believe energetically that has come across, and I believe very much when I joined out of necessity because I didn't know what else to do. We didn't have money for college. I didn't necessarily do very good in high school, and so it was just kind of like this band of rogues and vagabonds, like, although at the same time making very, very amazing things happen and accomplishing very, very amazing things. I think one of the things you hear is like the man finds himself, like if you can give man a purpose, like he's gonna rise to the occasion. And if you aren't able to do that, just give him something to do, And the Navy's very good at that. And I've freaking completely segued off the actual point of the story, I think.
That's okay. Whatever's present.
Yeah. No, I think it's just, I know the question was why, but then just so the Navy is very good at taking people who wonder why and giving them the answers that best serve the Navy.
Yes.
And that kind of, I believe it's very fear-based, and congratulations, shipmate, you found your answers. This is as good as it's going to be. And just to, and so if a guy joins with no purpose and doesn't realize where he actually wants to do, any hopes and desires he may have are quickly covered up with mission, duty, and service. And, 20 years later it goes by and those hopes and desires are growing into something really real and really great. And, he has this other identity kind of slapped on over the top of him. And it can be a really challenging environment. And then if you take away sunshine, regular sleep schedule, and, decent food, then your serotonin production is at an all-time low. And so you have 140 guys trapped inside of a 360-foot long steel tube that are generally grumpy and working on caffeine and candy bars. And yeah, it's a challenging environment. And so the fact that we're all beating each other up for fun to kind of spike that dopamine progression, or the oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins, like me and you talk about often, it's not a surprise. It's no surprise that you get bored enough. You're just literally walking in circles, looking at gauges, if you're a mechanic, or you're just sitting in front of the screen and like watching sound, like I was as a sonar tech. And and then it just repeats. You go to sleep, you wake up, you do the same thing. You do some maintenance, maybe you exercise, read a book, go to sleep, get up, do the same thing for, days, weeks, and months at a time. And it was definitely a challenge in the end, and I'm grateful for it now. And I realize so many reasons. I'm very interested, and it's challenging because I would love to infiltrate back in there somehow and kind of teach the Navy an abundance style leadership. Yet I think if you did, we would lose the reasons, at least propaganda wise, the reasons why we build Navy ships and the reasons why we're out there and blowing stuff up. And so I think it would be very counterintuitive, as I believe a whole bunch of that war machine is political and profit margins and stuff. You're making 3 submarines a year, and somebody's paying for that. Somebody's reaping the benefits. And so it's a real challenge to see what would happen if that scarcity and fear-based mindset was removed, and if the opposite was instilled. It'd be really interesting to see that happen. So I spend lots and lots of time thinking about that specifically in my coaching and in my parenting style and in my style as a husband, thinking, how can I be more abundant? How can I come from more from an infinite space? And doing my best to give my family the tools to not need to have a reason to go to war or blow things up or punch a guy in the neck because you're bored. And, you know, so it's like I remember these days often and think about them all the time. It's because I think it's too important not to.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the old world versus the new world, right? You kind of
Yeah,
talk
of
about
course.
short term versus, you know, the Cold
Mhm.
World. You know, Russia's the answer to everything we
Yeah.
do. And now what? It's not Russia. What is it? Oh, it's terrorists now. Like what?
Now
You
it's
know,
terrorists. Yeah.
right, that we're afraid of. So when you
Mhm.
talk about this idea of scarcity driving everything, and by the way, I just want to be really clear that I do everything I possibly can to support veterans, and I thank them consistently, routinely for their service. And, you know, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL when I was a kid. I've hung out with Navy
Yeah.
SEALs. I'm not cut out for that job. Thankfully, I didn't get down that road because I probably would have died very quickly or been very injured in the process of not becoming a Navy SEAL. However, you know, I really give a lot of credit. Like, these are the men and women who put their lives on the line so that we don't have to, right? Because there are real
For
threats in the
sure.
world. But
Absolutely.
then again, are there real threats that warrant the way we approach them? Is there a
For
better way
sure.
coming? Right? I feel like that we're at this pivotal time in human history where it's
Mhm.
like we're finally getting to a point where there really truly is enough to go around and we can create more than we actually need. And now the beliefs just haven't caught up yet.
Yeah.
Right? Technologically, it's possible to have food, energy, water, and shelter for every single human being on the planet. It has been a little for like maybe a decade or two, and we're just finally now catching up to like, oh wait, hold on, the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. How do we get everybody else to recognize that this is actually a physical fact? Like, we can actually do this, and then what do we do as a result? So I think it really
Right.
does come down to, you know, you can't change the world yourself, but you can change yourself and how you
Absolutely.
approach things. And just, you know, if you're listening to this at home, just understanding that you don't have to do it the same way it's always been done. We talk about traditions, we talk about myths, we talk about stories. There's this great documentary, actually. It's actually a series of them. There's 6 episodes so far on Netflix. It's called Myths and Monsters. And if you haven't checked it out, I really
Mhm.
recommend it. I watched a couple episodes the other day where they literally talk about all the myths that have persisted throughout all human civilizations. You know, the Romans, the Greeks, the this, that, the Vikings, the Norse gods, all this different stuff. And they all kind of rhyme, right? And they all kind of make
Right.
sense. Oh, this is how we deal with death. This is how we deal with war. This is how we deal with family and love and upbringing and all this stuff that we have today. We have our myths and our stories. But if we're beholden to them, like if you looked at a Viking myth, you might say, oh, that's ridiculous. But they really believed
They
in
really
that.
believed it.
And guess what? We really believe in something that might be ridiculous if we wait 100 years and look back at it. So just keeping that skeptical nature about our own crap and our own beliefs and our own structures, like
Mhm.
just knowing that we are machines that make up myths in order to
Yes.
survive, in order to thrive, in order to replicate. And it's just really a function of, hey, is this serving us? Like, if we objectively take our emotions out of this and look at this, is this serving us? Is it serving the world or not?
Mhm.
And being able to say, hey, maybe there's something better that will, and keeping that, you know, that standard high enough to say, hey, what do we want to accept as our reality?
True. And I love that you brought up that that we make up myths. And that's literally the one thing that separates us from every other species on the planet, is that we have the ability to imagine. That's it. And I think that's so amazing. And I was just thinking about what you were talking about, the scarcity thing. It's like, how come if deer don't have enough food, their population goes down? Because we are literally able to imagine ways out of it, and we continue to procreate. It's like, I'm going to have a baby, even though there's nothing to pay the bills. It's like, you know, because we can imagine all these different things. And it's, you know, it's a very, very great gift that we have. And on the same time, it's good to realize that that's there so we can check ourselves on occasion, you know?
Right. And you notice how wealthier people tend to have less children, just
Yeah, of
as a
course.
function of
Think,
form, right? They
well,
just,
yeah.
it's really strange to see and consider. Like, I've valued in my own life, you know, freedom and wealth. That's what have been working on, and I don't have any kids.
Yeah.
It was like really scary and made me grow a lot to spend time with a 5-year-old girl in the park yesterday, because her dad was like, whatever, I'm just gonna do this thing,
Yeah.
whatever I'm doing. And I'm like, all right, I'll play with this kid for a while. And it was actually
Yeah.
really like triggering for me to be around children. Imagine that. Like, for me just to play with a girl in a completely innocent public space,
Yeah.
like, really triggering for me, is I'm like
Yeah.
constantly waiting like the SWAT team to jump out of the bushes. What the hell is going on? I have to notice this shit myself all the time.
I think it's good. No, that's good stuff though. And I think I was just listening to this video, the ability to notice those triggers and notice that things are coming up. Like that's one of the most valuable things as a person who's wanting to grow. That's one of the most valuable things you can realize, like realizing like there's something going on. I need to dig into this. I need to figure out what's going on. Like that is a very, very good thing. That's not very practiced, I think, in a general scheme. Most people just let their triggers come. They project them externally instead of like looking inward. So I think that's awesome that you're able to notice that, you know, and then have these conversations about that is super, super huge.
Well, and it's funny because it shows up exactly the time of my life. I'm like, I kind of want to have kids in a couple of years. I should probably think about that more, right?
Oh,
like spend more time, you know, talking to women and like, what are their values? Like, you know, like, do they want children?
Yeah.
When do they want children? You know,
Yeah.
like, stuff like that, instead of the other stuff that I don't need to talk about that I've been doing for years and years and years that, you know, may or may not be ready to shift, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's just funny as a guy, especially, you know, in this modern age where I think the expectation is put upon us to be and do and give and have all these different things. And in the process of living, quote unquote, you never really make a life, right? It's just you're reacting to whatever shows up next. And I think a lot of people get sucked into that. It's really easy. There's a lot of
it is
patience along the way to just be like, you're going to do this now. And this is how your life's going to go. And you're in debt. So you have to do it. And now you have children. So you have to do it.
Oh man. I was in the car yesterday with McCare and we were driving through and there was a commercial for University of Hawaii, like advertising, you know, it's the new semester or whatever. And they're like, one of the questions that the radio announcer was posing was like, how do you know if college is right for you? And they're like, hey, we interviewed all these current college students to get their opinion. And they're like, enrolling for college was the best decision I ever made. How do you know? And I was sitting in the car, like, you have zero perspective. Like you're in college, just your debt ceilings is raising.
But I'm having fun and partying, and
I'm having fun. It's great. Like, yeah, okay, it's fun. How do you know it's the right thing? You never really know, and I think that's a good thing and a bad thing contextually, depending on ways you want to look at it. You know, if you're having fun, great. You know, however, when somebody's like, was college the right choice? And you're like, stop and pause for a second before you just like, college was the greatest choice I ever made. You've been here a week. Like college just started. Like calm down a second. Like, oh, I'm not really sure yet. I'm still figuring out. Like if people can slow down and just like that reaction thing, like they're just reacting to the question. Oh yeah, it's great. I'm having so much fun. Stop and slow down and think and picture where you are. You know what? I don't really have the data to answer that question. Let me go do some more research. Let me go dig in. Let me check in with these feelings that came up on the playground with this 5-year-old girl yesterday and find out what that actually means. And I think in your case, like, oh, these feelings with children is something that I didn't even realize. And then it's like, and then it kind of peels back. I remember McCare and I got married. We were 35 and she was 36. And now it's 4 years later, we have a daughter that we never planned to have, at least in the beginning, we were like, do you want kids? Nope. Do you want kids? Nope. We're good. Okay, sweet. You know, it's a little secret handshake and we're moving on all happy. And then a couple of years into it, it's like, the kind of relationship that we had was one that's so open where we can communicate with each other and be completely vulnerable and real. And then because my previous relationships were never like that, where it didn't feel safe to be scared or to want to do these extracurricular stuff and have like this specific kind of life. So it's like, well, if I'm not able to share that, why am I going to want to have a kid with this other person? And so then, you know, you enter into this. So it's really interesting how it evolves. And man, that's like a whole other conversation. Kids, dude, whole other conversation.
What for you, Ryan, like what has been the thing that you would like to be? I think, you know, like if you were to look back on your life, let's picture like 85 or 90, you lived a great life.
Okay.
Awesome. And now your kids are all grown up. Maybe they have kids of their own. You know, what would you want to look back and say that you accomplished, and how do you feel like What are some great questions, I guess, additionally, that you would have people ask in order to build their life?
Man, I just got like tingles just went through me because this is such an expansive list. I'm so in the moment when I really allow myself to be, I'm so grateful for the life that I've had already. But the one thing that comes up for me right now, and it could be because we're talking about children, is that when my daughter's 18 or 25 or whatever, like the guy she brings home to like say, hey, dad, we're getting married. Like I want that guy to be like a really great guy. So one of the biggest drivers for me in my life now is to really, really on a moment by moment basis, like re-choosing into being a great man and being whole and being able to feel and being able to process emotions and being able to care for my family on a really, really deep and personal level, while also maintaining a balance to care for my adventuresome spirit at the same time. I believe in Western culture, United States, and probably the whole world, we're training our children to be not adventurers. We're training them to be consumers and employees. And I'm doing everything now. And I know with my son, it's challenging because I was absent in his life for so long. And so here, like one of the things me and him just had like an evolving conversation last night, of one we're constantly having, is just to really, really show them that being truly what they want to be is possible. And I think in the sense too, I want to touch on this a little bit more deeper. I think there's a lot of stuff going on right now. It's like, you could do whatever you want, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you're 5'6" and you're a white guy and you're not going to play in the NBA, like it's just not true. But the misnomer and how we kind of say it, like you can do anything you ever want, like that's not necessarily 100% true in a specific context. However, waking up in the morning and deciding I'm going to go left versus right, like that choice is really real. You know, if your boss is freaking hammering you in the face, you're not required to take that. Like that's a choice that you choose into moment by moment basis. So teaching my children, like if I see my children like making empowered choices in the moment, difficult choices, because there's always pros and cons on either side. And so looking back 85 years old, like to see my children making empowered choices, making challenging choices, to take on pain, to get reward, or ignoring pain because they're like, you know what, that's just not what I want. I'm going to go down this path. Yes, I'm going to miss out on this stuff. I'm going to commit to this path. And just like being committed people, like that will be super awesome for me. I would really be stoked about that. And the reason that's huge for me is because, 35 of my almost 39 years now, I spent choosing what other people said was what I needed to do. Do good in high school, get a job, get married, have kids, procreate, blah, 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 blah. How come? I don't know. It's because that's what we've always done.
Right.
And
receiving pain when you didn't do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the receiving pain is how we grow, which is completely okay. And I do not think that there is a way to avoid that. I do not think that there's a way to avoid that. As humans, that's how we're wired. We grow we're a learning species. And sometimes learning is painful, and sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. And just, inspired and committed people is my biggest dream for my kids, and probably my biggest dream in life at the moment. And all the while nurturing my childlike spirit as well, keep that growing and blossoming is really, that's going to be what's great for me. And
inspired and committed people can change the world.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, that's the only thing that does change the world, right? And they change themselves. They see the opportunity to come at this from a new angle, and give it enough time, a little bit of momentum builds, and pretty soon they're evolving into something great.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to foster that in people, Ryan. And that's exciting. So for anybody here listening at home, let's go practical and tactical for a minute, because
Yeah.
we can talk about the kind of overarching things, and you're an entertaining storyteller, certainly. Uh, and we could tell great stories all day, but I really want people to come away with something from this podcast, and make sure that, they come away thinking, I'm really glad I invested this time, not just to learn one person's perspective from, something that most people will never do, right? Spend 20 years in a metal tube with a bunch
Yeah,
of
for sure.
testosterone, and you're looking for Russians, right? And looking at sound. So what are some of the things that the gifts that you bring, that you wish that if you had a microphone that had the ear of everybody in the world, what would you whisper into it? What do you wish everybody knew?
Speaking, let's talk about the Navy first. One of the things that I definitely screwed up almost every day for 20 years is not listening to my leadership and giving myself the opportunity to be understanding where they're coming from. I mean, like all the guys that were like, Russia, 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 instead of being like, that's the dumbest thing ever. Like taking the opportunity to actually learn like what it was like for them, instead of just wondering what's in it for me, I would have been a much, much better follower in turn than I would have been able to lead better when I did. Because once it was my turn, because that's the way the Navy works, you do turnover, and as you grow, you gain some followers, and as you grow even bigger, you're given followers, and then from there. And so once it got to my turn before my breakdown, if there was somebody that I didn't really care for, like I fought him tooth and nail to the end, because I believed I was starting the revolution. And so it was a very divisive tactic. Like I had my guys that were like, in a sense, what I would believe was forward thinking and more of a different way. Yet at the same time, we didn't learn a way to work together. And I didn't help foster that at all. So if this is in your daily life, if it's Janice, the teller at Walgreens, or Dave, your boss whom you hate, or whoever, do yourself and that person a favor by getting to know them on a personal level and finding out what makes them tick, instead of just combating them for the sake of combat. So it's and I think if we did that, if we started, just like you're saying, if we started with ourselves and then did that in our homes, and then the people in our homes would go out and do that in their perspective spaces, and then me and you get together, and then me and you are doing that as a team and working together. So really, 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 regardless of how you feel about the other person, take the opportunity to get to know them personally, and you're going to be able to work together so much better. Because when that person shows up, however they do, because of their experiences, because of their growth, because of where they were. And I know me and you have talked to each other about ourselves for hours and hours and weeks and months. And so when I show up and you're like, that's how Ryan shows up, and this is why, because I understand his past, and I'm able to openly discuss him with that, because we have that friendship and that relationship together, and we're able to do that. So the number one thing, practical and tactical, pause your own stuff. Just, those triggers come up, and just like, kind of like the college question, like, and take the moment to really, okay, why am I upset? I'm not upset at the other person. I'm just upset. Why is that? How come this person is reacting like this? And if you don't know, ask. So ask questions. Always ask why. Continue to ask why, no matter how much people beat you and thrash up against it. And if they're not ready to tell you, be like, okay, cool. I'll go ask the next person, and I'll come back to you later, like kind of circling. And so I think at the lowest basis level, just approach everyone and everything from a place of, I don't know. And just be open to the things that you can learn. Because there is so much. I love talking to Savannah and her 100-book goal. Savannah's
She nailed it, by the way.
Yeah, she did. I'm so impressed.
100 books in a year. That's incredible.
The most impressive thing about Savannah and her goal completion, I asked her this. We had a call a few weeks ago. Savannah, what was the biggest thing you learned in a year of reading 100 books? And when I asked the question, I kind of expected her to be like, oh, I found out the dinosaurs, some random obscure fact. The answer she gave me was that the thing that I most learned was how much there is out there that I don't know.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my goodness, that's the most brilliant answer. It's so brilliant, because we could start at one edge of the information sphere and just start eating our way across. It's going to produce way, way more than we could ever digest.
Yes.
It just, you know, and you can be closed off to your own singular vision way. If you open yourself, you're going to get more of that. And your relationships.
Two quotes come to mind with regard to reacting versus responding. The Viktor Frankl quote, if you guys haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, I recommend it. I was very grateful to have an opportunity to study. I had a professor who was a Sephardic Jew whose parents had emigrated from Ireland, and he spent a lot of time in Spain. And his course on Holocaust literature, I had to read a lot about the Holocaust, and to be able to put yourself in the perspectives of both the victims and the perpetrators, and to really see, you know, what the stories were that are driving them, the myths that were that are driving them. In this Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about, you know, basically surviving Auschwitz. And one of the key takeaways from that book is there's, you know, in between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is the ability to respond or to react. And that can be the difference between life and death. It can be the difference between friend or foe. It can be the difference between, you know, another quote that I love is defense is the first act of war.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we can get better at communicating, if we can better just relating to each other and just understanding and putting ourselves in other people's perspectives, we can literally change the fabric of what it is to be alive.
Yes.
And that's so brilliant and so important. So that's just something that I come back to often and just remind myself is like, I don't really know what's going on for this human being or this situation. So just to really sit in the landmark equation, right? Just like, I don't know what I don't know. What I don't know makes up most of the universe. And in fact, that's what the universe is mostly made up of, is stuff you don't know. Yeah. And that's beautiful and exciting, and you'll never know it all. And it's a little bit like, keeps in perspective, you know, the pale blue dot picture, like Carl Sagan, you know, seeing the Voyager go away and take a picture of this little tiny pale blue dot, all the politicians, all the great heroes, all of the journeys, all of you, all your family, your countries, everything is on this pale blue dot that's ever happened for us. And just remembering we're so small, but so powerful, and that we can create that experience as we see fit. It's just a beautiful thing. And just to remind, you know, yourself of that, and to picture that at 19, knowing that took me 10 more years to figure that out.
Yeah, I have to remind myself every time I talk to her that she's only 19 years old. But I guess just to kind of touch on yours, on what I guess would be the second thing, is those triggers that come up, and then that space between notice and respond or reaction, is that we're not able to eliminate those triggers entirely. I don't believe so, at least. We're not able to. They will always be there because it's part of how we were programmed, just like a computer system. You do something specific on your computer, a reaction or response happens. However, the thing that we can do, I know you play the guitar and I figured you've been doing that for several years, or like shooting a basketball, or learning to play the violin, or learning to speed read or retain better knowledge. Just like with those, just like the noticing of like, oh, there's the trigger, oh, there's the trigger, oh. If you practice noticing that trigger, you can make that space longer, you know, and the goal is to also at the same time reduce the duration of which your trigger lasts. So certain things happen in your trigger for 22 days and you just shut down and you push people away and you don't talk to them. And then, you know, if you can reduce that to 22 hours, 22 minutes, 22 seconds, and then at the same time, elongate that space as well. And it may just be a few seconds, you know, but there's a lot that can process in a few seconds. So just practice that noticing, practice and noticing. I like to ask people, like, what's your top 3 triggers? You know, mine is like injustice, whiny people, and I don't know, my son being loud behind closed doors, talking to his friends when he's playing video games, you know. And it's so, and this is a conversation my son and I had last night. Like, I'm walking by his door, like perfect timing. I've been hearing him talking for like the last hour, and then I walk by at the perfect time and hear some colorful language, and I open the door. I'm like, hey man, haven't we talked about this? And so I'm practicing to not bust through the door yelling and screaming, using the exact same stuff that I heard, you know. Because I know where he learns it from. It's just like on Christmas Story. He probably learned it from his father, you know.
I learned it from watching you, Dad.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, acknowledging that, you know, we're passing these things on and really, really
I
giving.
I love how 2 years are like big world issues, like injustice, and that's like my
Yeah.
son being loud.
My son being loud. And the reason I put that up there, the reason I say that about my son is because at least once a day, I say this thing to Andrew, I'm right here. I don't need you to yell at me. But then I'll like come in the living room and talk to McCara and be so excited and animated as you know I could be. And I'll be like, oh man, I'm really yelling too, aren't I? So it's the things that we're triggered by are often I'd say nearly 100% of the time are the very, very same things that we do on some sort of molecular level that we would just wish we could get rid of. And so
Whatever you're withholding from the world is
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh man.
So
Life is silly, isn't it?
yeah, I love it.
Things and finding balances and duality. That's why I love black and white animals. Not just because they're freaking adorable. It's also because it reminds me that they're walking yin yang.
Yeah, they're walking for
light
sure.
in the dark, the shadow and the light.
Yeah, man.
Good stuff.
For sure, dude.
I had somebody really smart point out to me the other day, Daniel Schmachtenberger, that they're not actually opposites.
Well, black and white.
Yeah, well, that light and dark aren't opposite. It's just one is the absence of the other. And light destroys darkness. It's not the opposing force. It's just there's photons here. There's not photons here.
Yeah, something exists or it doesn't. Yeah.
But we made up a story. I made up a story for years. I'm living under the story, light and dark.
Yeah.
Totally opposite.
Oh, it's even more so like that story was passed down for somebody else's story. And I believe in some certain extents from your parents' DNA melding together and passing it through there. You know, like I believe that there's a certain amount of trauma that's carried through that way, as well as the things that we're taught. And the good news is that once we notice that, we can change it. You know,
and what you're most brilliant at, and what I kind of want to end on, I think, is just, you know, if you were to need support in unpacking your triggers, unpacking your stories, unpacking your why, and getting to the point where you are completely committed and completely in flow as far as like you're inspired and you're taking action, you're committed to something, Ryan's your guy for that. I just truly believe that. Like I've spent enough time with him to know like he's committed to that purpose and this is a purpose in life. And you know, whether it's one-on-one or one-to-many, which he's brilliant at, that's going to be the next phase of his life for sure. And he's still transitioning into that, but I know that he's an incredible leader. I know he's an incredible father. I know he's an incredible husband. I know he's an incredible coach. So if you're struggling in any of those areas or you're just kind of stuck, like I know I'm not the why guy. People come to me all the time. They're like, hey Brad, I don't feel good or whatever about this one. And I'm like, action. I had to realize that to stop myself and be like, no, I'm not the fire guy. I don't light fires. I throw gasoline on fires. If somebody's like, I want to do this and this and this, and I'm committed, I'm like, cool. Bam, 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 go. But if they're not sure, I would send them to a guy like Ryan, because Ryan's the white guy. He'll find out.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I remember having a conversation with you. Oh man, this was probably 8 months ago, talking about a colleague of mine, and he asked me a question and he said, have you gone deep enough with yourself? And I remember at the time, have you gone deep enough with yourself to actually hold space for other people? And I remember that question triggered me really badly. And we had barely talked since then. Me and him actually talked to us the other day. We're actually having coffee on Friday. I'm super excited about it. So really give yourself the opportunity to, and this isn't just you specifically, this is to everybody listening at home, like really give yourself the opportunity to look inside and figure out your own why, and really learn to be quiet with that and just let the stuff come up without pushing it back down, as we're kind of trained to do in our Captain America style society. And the more you do that for yourself, the more you can really do that for other people at the same time, and just being present. And it's something to, because I love to be with other people. Yet if I let my triggers freaking fly up, I fly into combat mode and freaking, you know, and it doesn't really help anybody either. Brad, me and Brad, I love you, brother. Big internet hug.
Internet hug.
Yeah.
White, California.
So
Love it.
Yeah.
So if people want to reach out and take this to the next level, Ryan, how do they do that? Where can they find you online? What are the places?
The best spot right now, I'm transitioning websites at the moment from firstwakeups.com to ryancharaba.com. So you can look at either of those presently or in the future, although they're both under construction. So hit me up on Facebook, facebook.com/ryancharaba. Send me a friend request, shoot me a message. Send me an email, ryancharaba@gmail.com. Reach out to Brad. He can make a connection.
And that's RYANCHARABA.
Perfect. Yeah, man.
Yep. Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, dude. I appreciate it.
Show. Any parting words of wisdom for the audience?
Just every single person you pass on the street, give a loving response to. You know, Tony Robbins, me and Brad talk about this all the time. There's two types of communication in this world. And this has been like my 2017 goal to notice this, and 2018 to acknowledge the same thing. There's two types of responses. There's cries for help and loving responses. So listen for the cries for help and give loving responses to every single person you pass. If it's a guy taking your valet money, if you're ordering food from Jack in the Box, if you're the waitress, your wife, your kids, really, really come from a place of love with everything you say as much as you can. And when you screw up, because you will, give yourself that same kind of love, because we're human and we make mistakes, and just give yourself the opportunity to learn from that.
That's beautiful, Brian. Thank you so much for being on the show. And on behalf of everybody at Make More Marbles, we love you. Thank you. And thanks so much for listening to the Make More Marbles podcast. For more tips, hacks, and strategies to create an amazing, abundant life in your health, wealth, and relationships, whatever that means to you, head on over to makemoremarbles.com. Check out our cool explainer video about what we're about, and join our community of entrepreneurial game changers. We want to help you level up your life in every possible way. And don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, wherever you're listening to your podcasts, and please do leave a review. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next podcast.